Welcome, neighbors. My name is David Gomez, and I serve as Chief of Staff for Councilmember George Casey. I'll be moderating tonight's meeting, which focuses on homelessness response, beautification efforts, and related city enforcement policies. We are proud to co-host this event with council members who deeply care about community livability and results. Councilmember Pamela Campos from District 2 and Councilmember George Casey from District 10. We're also joined tonight by city staff from the Housing Department, Beautify SJ, and the Department of Transportation's Parking Compliance team. Let's begin with some welcoming remarks from Councilmember Campos.
Thank you, David. And thank you everyone who is joining this conversation tonight. I am grateful for our teams, the city staff working to put together this very important town hall on our city's response to homelessness in South San Jose. My name is Pamela Campos, and I have the honor of representing San Jose City Council District 2. I, along with Councilmember Casey, represent much of South San Jose, and as many of you know, District 2 is home to several interim housing and safe sleeping sites. They serve some of the roughly 5,400 individuals who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness in our city. And it's important that we communicate clearly with our constituents how our city is working to address this issue and ensure that your questions about our response strategies are answered. So today we have convened city partners who are doing this work. Councilmember Casey and I have invited them to answer your questions and address your concerns about our city's response to homelessness. I am grateful for Omar Passons and our city staff for facilitating this conversation and being here to answer your questions. And I look forward to understanding more about the city's response, how my office can be supportive. And I will now hand it off to Councilmember Casey for his remarks.
I don't know if I have much to add. That was a pretty comprehensive introduction. For the sake of saving most of this time to respond to the questions, I'll cede the rest of my time. Councilmember Campos did a good job with the introduction.
All righty, moving on. We've received an extensive and thoughtful list of questions from residents in Districts 2 and 10. These reflect the lived experiences and frustrations of our community. We've organized them into 3 sections: unsheltered homelessness, interim supportive housing, DOT enforcement, and public right-of-way compliance. So let's begin. We'll start with coordination across city departments and efforts on the street level. Question number 1, what are you doing to ensure that Beautify SJ is working closely with homeless and unhoused teams and staff at the city? I get the impression that the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, and the teams do not coordinate well, if at all. So let's hand that over to BSJ or City from Housing.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Olympia Williams, Deputy Director in PRNS. That's a great question. So Beautify SJ and Housing have been working in close coordination since 2020 when we had the COVID lockdowns. It was at that time that we developed the encampment management strategy and realized that we had to work closely with our housing partners. In fact, BSJ was really established to support our housing partners. We believe in the work that our housing department does to get people housed and provide the services they need. BSJ is really developed to keep areas clean, work with folks in encampments, and respond to issues that arise from residents, communities, neighborhoods, and businesses around cleanliness and sanitation, and to kind of really focus and hone in on that work that we do. We have, at this time, our city manager's office has convened a managing and ending homelessness interdepartmental working team that is comprised of 7 different departments. And we coordinate work not just across BSJ and Housing, but BSJ, Housing, our Department of Transportation, San Jose Police Department, and our Environmental Services Department.
Thank you, Olympia, for that answer. So moving on to question number 2. What is the metric to evaluate the effectiveness of the plan to address homelessness in San Jose?
Yeah, thank you for that, David. I think it's several parts. So we have a community plan to end homelessness. We're coordinated with the community, the COC at the organizational level with the county. One of the metrics that we use is in comparison to the grant agreements that we have. So we have grant agreements that indicate what the efforts that are necessary against the available supply of housing and connecting individuals to resources. So the challenge that we're going to continue to have is that as we roll out these programs, as homelessness decreases, we still have some individuals who might be hesitant to accept services. We're going to be a lot more affirmative in getting them into housing. But the challenge, again, is going to be connecting the resources to the individuals. But at the street level and at the operational level, what we do is we manage our grants, we audit these programs to see those true deliverables. If they're not meeting the mark, we reconsider some of our grant agreements, and you'll see some of these changes coming up in this next budget cycle.
Thanks for that answer, Cupid.
Hold on, I'm sorry, Dave. Just for clarification, when you say grants, you mean grants that, and I'm just assuming like I'm a constituent listening, trying to get some clarity. Grants that we give out to nonprofits, grants that we receive as a city. What is that? Just some clarity there.
Yeah. So let me take a step back, Councilmember. The agreements that we have to operate an EIH, to do outreach, all of the work that happens between the city of San Jose and contracted partners are executed in a grant agreement. So a grant is not us giving money. Think of a grant as a contract. So we have a grants team. We indicate that we have a contract. These contracts have metrics. The metrics have how many people you need to enroll, how many people we want to graduate into long-term housing. But the honest truth is that unless there is available housing long-term supply, we can do the outreach, we can get you into our interim housing, but there's nowhere to graduate you to. You know, it's a math, it ends up being a simple math problem. But when we're talking about the execution of what we do, they're all in grant agreements. We get some entitlement funds. You think about community development block grant. You think about housing opportunities with people with AIDS. That's our federal funds. You think about how we're connected to the county. All of these are going to be grant agreements that we end up bringing to you, both Councilmember Campos and you, Councilmember Casey. We talk about these grant agreements and then we execute them on behalf of the city once they've been approved. And that's how we hold our partners accountable.
So in theory, we could be doing a great job and successful in terms of the grants, but the public wouldn't necessarily see any improvement in terms of the number of homeless that they see. So there's somewhat of a disconnect there. We're doing what we can operationally, but the end result in terms of what they're seeing, the optics of it may not necessarily be improving.
Oh, absolutely. So we have outreach teams. I have my outreach lead on this panel. And if we get to those questions, we could talk about it. The thing is that they're out there every single day. They're going into the trenches. They're going into the waterways. They're going to where people need the most, help and assistance, and they build these relationships. They're doing that on a daily basis. They do it in the evenings. They do it in the mornings. They're doing it pretty consistently. So that's an ongoing activity. The challenge, like we said before, is as we build the interim supply, we're moving people inside so they get sheltering. Your acuity goes up, the comorbidities go up when you're exposed to the elements, and that's what makes it harder to house you on the back end. But unless we connect them to that long-term supply, which we're working out, they end up getting outreach, and then they end up getting to our EIH system. But then it's another step that needs to happen there. I think the community is seeing a lot more transition. There's a lot more individuals going to EIHs, but we're still working out that next step.
Thank you, Cupid.
Thank you, Cupid, for the answer, and thank you, Councilmember Casey, for expanding on that question. So we're going to move on to question number 3. What are the latest plans on clearing illegal homeless encampments in districts 2 and 10?
So in terms of encampment abatement, when we opened up our EIHs, think of Villa del Oro and Monterey and Branham, every encampment within a 1.5 mile radius of those EIHs was abated. Does it mean that people did not resettle or find a new area to establish an encampment? So if people do see encampments in their area, they can report those, and I'll make sure that we get that out in the notes, the link that people can report those encampments. The city does a substantial number of encampment abatements on a daily basis. Last year, we had 345 abatements. As of today, during this fiscal year, we're already at 717 abatements, and think we'll end the year close to somewhere around 900. We abate encampments based on setbacks. If they're within 150 feet of a school, if an encampment is blocking access to a public facility, think of library, community center, other city or government facility. A library is impeding access to a hospital, trauma center, emergency room, etc. we do come out and abate. And we also have code of conduct that we have put together where we want people to follow certain good neighbor policies. And if not, it can lead to abatement. I want to stress that we focus in Beautify SJ our abatement efforts around built structures, tents, encampments. If a person is parked in and living in a lived-in vehicle, that is a different process for that vehicle to be moved.
Thank you for that answer, Olympia. Moving on to question number 4. When are we going to get the tent city cleaned up around the percolation ponds?
The encampment that's located near the percolation ponds by 85 and Almaden Expressway, some of those encampments are on Valley Water property. Valley Water was notified and they abated and removed those encampments. And other encampments are on Caltrans property in that area. And we're working closely with Caltrans to get that scheduled. So there are 3 different jurisdictions that own property in that area: the city, Caltrans, and Valley Water. BSJ works with all of them to coordinate cleanup and abatement efforts. We are aware of that and know that that is an area that has had returning encampments, and it is on our priority list to see what we can do to install some deterrents to hopefully reduce re-encampment of the area.
Thank you, Olympia.
Sorry if I can jump in one more time. So Olympia, just to kind of, because this is a topic that comes up often, and I understand there's interjurisdictional issues, but just procedurally, it's on VTA land or someone else's land, but ultimately it's our land or our sphere of influence. It impacts us intimately. So are there any hurdles in reaching out to the other jurisdictions? Is there a lag time, or are we able to just unilaterally, even though it's on their land, based on agreements or conversations we've had, to go in and abate and do what's necessary?
Definitely. So great question. So we have an entire team that does interjurisdictional abatements. We just executed an agreement with VTA, which will allow us to more closely work with them to abate things, whether it's illegal dumping, trash, graffiti, encampments on their property. We have an agreement with the County of Santa Clara. We have one with Union Pacific Railroad. We have an agreement that we're finalizing right now with Caltrans, and we work closely with Valley Water. So we've reached out to Valley Water on multiple occasions. They work closely with us. They're always willing to modify their schedule to meet us where we're at so we can address issues. I think the challenge we have is that we do a substantial number of abatements, but unless people have housing to go into, oftentimes people will return. They tend to return to the same spots because to them that's home. They're familiar with the community. They're familiar with the area. They feel comfortable there. But like I said, we do a substantial number of abatements with the city as well as our jurisdictional partners. And where we know that their timelines don't always align perfectly with ours, I've worked to get agreements with them so that we are able to just go do the work on their property.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you again, Olympia. So moving on to question number 5. Many homeless neighbors have mental health issues. How does the city provide mental health services as part of the process to move them into shelter?
Yeah, and that, again, thank you for that question. That's one of the challenges. The county provides mental health services. How we coordinate with them is on the outreach. One of the challenges that you have with individuals who have mental health illnesses, you might see them at the corner. They have this certification process, whether it's going to be a 5150 hold, so an involuntary hold, or they have a 3-day assessment, but then they release them back out. That's a high challenge for the county. And I know the council members, both of them are nodding because that's one of the things that they're probably going to be discussing with the county is how do we increase the number of beds so people aren't released back into the community without the services that they need. So here at the housing department, and this is where I'm going to call out one of my colleagues, Vanessa, she leads our outreach. Can you explain a little bit more at the ground level of how we connect?
So we have our outreach teams, and if they come across somebody that needs these services, we have established partnerships with our county behavioral health teams, the different acronyms at AOT, Trust, Heat Team, Hot Team. So we would initially determine if they meet the criteria. We have met with the teams to establish which team would get which criteria. We would then put in that referral. We would also utilize 988 depending on the severity of it as well. Our team is also trained to help de-escalate certain situations. So we first start with de-escalation. If that doesn't seem to work, we then make our phone calls to the appropriate team depending on what that person is experiencing. And then if it escalates even more, it would be a 911 or a 988 call.
Thank you for that, Vanessa. And I think one of the challenges, if I'm going to call out the elephant in the room, is that when individuals return, that shows that there's going to be a growing need for what's called permanent supportive housing. This individual is probably going to have a challenge for the rest of their life. We have to build out that supply. This is one of the challenges that not only San Jose is having, but I think you're seeing this nationally as we're going deeper into encampments, we're going deeper into engaging with individuals. We're figuring out that they have high levels of acuity, meaning that they're going to need a massive investment and more wraparound services. So we can connect them to the mental health needs and services that they have, but unless the beds are there, they end up being not released, but they end up returning back to the areas that they were encamped and engaging with us again.
Great. Thank you both for the answer. Vanessa, for those that don't know anything about 988, can you explain to the attendees what 988 is?
Yes, so 988 would be a resource for a person to call if they are witnessing somebody experiencing a mental health crisis. And they would then ask you a series of questions, triage which team would be best to respond to this need. So depending on what you're seeing, it's always best to report the behavior, not necessarily they maybe if they're homeless, but whatever behavior you're seeing and whatever that is striking you to think that they might be having a mental health episode.
And if I could just make a comment to kind of emphasize or at least highlight something that was said in terms of the county is ultimately responsible for mental health situations and services. And so we as the city, and to Cupid's point, if they don't have the beds, I don't mean to pass the buck, but this does fall under the purview of the county. And, you know, candidly, they've been derelict in their duty in terms of creating the beds that we need and addressing this need. Just felt compelled to make that point.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Vanessa, is it just as simple as picking up your cell phone or your home phone and just dialing 988?
Yes, it is.
Thank you for that answer. Moving to the next question, we have the encampment is back on Branham near the light rail station. How can we prevent people from returning to areas that have already been cleared out? And I think they're directing that question to Cupid. Cupid, do
Yeah,
you
that
want to
might
answer that
be
question?
something that both Olympia and Vanessa can kind of chime into. One of the challenges that we have is that as individuals are abated, if they return, if it's a no re-encampment zone, we tell them to move on. That's one of the reasons why we prioritize individuals being intaked into Branham and Monterey. If they did not accept the housing, they still have to move on. Olympia, do you want to kind of touch on what your team does in the event of any re-encampment? And then Vanessa, maybe you can touch on how we continue to do outreach.
Definitely. If a person re-encamps in an area that's a no encampment zone, we have teams that are on routes and staff that are dedicated to just managing these no encampment zones. There's 14 of them throughout the city of San Jose. One of them runs for a 13-mile stretch. On one creek, one runs for a 4-mile stretch on another creek. And then we have a no encampment zones around all of our EIH, safe parking, hotels, etc. If a person re-encamps in those areas, they're immediately abated without notice. So we find out and we abate them. We even have a team, we have an abatement team that runs Monday through Saturday. So if PD happens to see someone on a Sunday, they usually alert the team and they're abated first thing Monday.
Vanessa,
Great.
do you want to speak to our outreach?
Yes, and for instances like this, if we are reacting to a concern that comes into the city, we have a reactive team that would respond to this call. They would go out, they would check in with the individuals. They ensure that they are in our homeless information management system, which is the database that we use to track all services we provide for individuals. We ensure that they have updated assessments, and we gently remind them that they are in a place where they shouldn't be, and they're if they have a place that they could relocate to. We then talk through what those services can look like from the various options that we have, either the Here For You hotline we refer them to if they would like a shelter bed, Homeward Bound if they have family that they would like to reunify with.
Thank you for the answers. Moving on to the next question. An encampment behind Great Oaks Water, 20 Great Oaks Boulevard, was recently abated. Will the city be placing no encampment signs to comply with the no re-encampment within 2 blocks of an emergency interim housing site? Second part of that question is, this camp was right across from Bernal and Monterey.
Yes, so I'm thinking that sounds like that's the area near the 20 Great Oaks Water Company and the Jable, right, Burnell. So the city owns a piece of remnant property back behind that area. We abated that entire stretch as well as repaired the fence. That area will not become a no encampment zone because it will be, it's managed now by SJPD in terms of trespassing. So we have SJPD. We also have our Union Pacific Police Department that has an interest in not having people in that remnant property coming across the track back there. So that area is a no trespassing zone, which just gives us a little bit more leeway when we need to address issues, especially in the evening.
Thank you, Olympia. Moving on. Camping and defacing on defecating on the streets and sidewalks is illegal. If my property is on the street, I would be fined. What does the city allow homelessness to increase with time? Why isn't the personal property and garbage removed immediately?
Thank you for the question. I believe if a person is encamped on a sidewalk, we do remove people, but our goal is always to give people notice so that they can self-relocate. If there's trash, debris, urine, feces on the sidewalk, we also have that removed and professionally cleaned up. In terms of personal property, if a person does not take personal property, there are certain items that we store for up to 90 days to make sure that people can be reunited with their property. We actually deliver it to them now. If a person calls and says, I was living at X location, my encampment was abated, my property was stored, and they said, I have no way to get there, we'll actually take their property to them. I think that's the gist of the question, if I understood it correct, David.
I think your answer satisfies the question. Thank you, Olympia. Let's see, moving on to the next question. For places that have been previously cleared, can there be a group of people whose sole responsibility is to monitor those areas? It seems like it's forever for some to check back, and then a whole new encampment is then reformed. Then it takes weeks to clear it again.
Yeah, so if a person is in a no encampment zone, those areas have teams that specifically work to monitor them. And if anyone re-encamps, they're immediately abated. For encampments outside of that no encampment zone, people can report those encampments or they're discovered by the staff, whether they're out on a route or doing other or RVP3 or other services to lived-in vehicles. Unfortunately, it does take us about 2 weeks to get to every encampment. We're trying to cover 181 square mile area, as well as working on other property that's within San Jose, but may belong to other jurisdictions. So a substantial amount of abatement work that we are doing, right? The teams, we have increased teams over the last couple of years. We went from having 2 teams to there's 5 abatement teams, but we still are finding ourselves kind of in this cycle of unfortunately needing to abate. And if people aren't moving into housing, aren't moving into a new EIH that's coming into the community, it makes it very difficult. A person kind of just has to move if they relocate in a particular area. I also want to say that there are times that people may move to an area that is outside of a setback. It's out there, they're following or adhering to the city's code of conduct, and we don't abate them. They just go on a route and they will get routine trash pickup and bio-waste removal services once a week.
Thanks, Olympia. And this is our final question from this particular topic. How can maintenance be assured around the homeless homes as weeds and trash keep growing? It needs to be cleaned up periodically.
Yeah, so same thing. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Vanessa. A little bit of clarification. Is this in the encampments or is this around emergency interim housing? Just want to be sure.
So the question is kind of vague. I'll just read it for what it says. It says, how can maintenance be assured around the homeless homes, I guess the encampments itself, as weeds and trash keeps growing? And then the person states it needs to be cleared up and cleaned up periodically.
Definitely. So we do have weekly trash service. If we get to a site and realize a person is not adhering to one of our good neighbor rules, which is trying to keep your encampment within a 12 by 12, they get something called an enhanced cleanup. What that is we come in, remove a lot of the debris. Usually the weeds are taken down at that time, but the person is allowed to stay in the area. We just want to reduce the debris, address weeds, etc. But like I said, I'll make sure that Anthony has the email that he can send back out to the guests to report, because we are getting into fire season, and depending on where the weeds are, that area might be prioritized.
Thanks again, Olympia. So let's now shift to long-term housing solutions. We'll discuss interim and supportive housing questions, and these questions look at accountability, spending, operations of housing programs. So first question is there a city or county or state report that summarizes the number of permanent interim housing units for the homeless? Second part of that question is, how many people are housed in these units? How much has been spent within the last year and the last 10 years?
Thanks for the question. So yes, HCDC has a report, HUD has a report around what the regional homelessness count is. The last point in time count that counts the unsheltered population was done in 2023. We recently did one in 2025, but the results have not been released. The last unsheltered count showed that there was about 6,400 unhoused, and then about 4,300 go unsheltered every night. If you're speaking about our current emergency interim housing supply, there's the actual capital expenditures that are for modular builds that are a little bit quicker. If you don't know, we have a housing emergency declaration that allows us to bypass some of the development processes to site these modular units a lot quicker. Current operations, we spend about anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 per space to house individuals. That services from food to site security to site maintenance to asset and unit turnover. We have safe parking programs. We have other programs like rapid rehousing that are a tenant-based rental assistance program, rapid rehousing and tenant-based rental assistance program. All in, we probably invest about $4,000 to $5,000 a month, ending up being about anywhere between $30,000 to $50,000 per unit per space or per voucher assistance. The deeper part of this is that we connect with the county through the Here For You hotline. You heard my colleague Vanessa indicate that when we enter information into what's called the HMIS, that puts them in line to have a deeper assessment. They are then examined if they would like housing that is available. That's on the county side. Within the city's current emergency interim housing supply, you're going to see a build out of several hundred more units. It's not going to be enough, but we're taking this bite of the elephant one bite at a time. And then our site operations, like I said, we're focused a lot on security and a lot on case management and helping individuals get to that next step. We do have codes of conduct. We remind individuals that they do not have tenancy rights. They are program participants because we do not charge rent, and these are not long-term units. So you'll see that as we house more people in the interim, the unsheltered number will go down. The unhoused number might remain the same until we connect them to that long-term housing resource. And that's some of the conversations that the council members will go into as we divide out the budget to release the funds to build that supply. I do have a couple of my colleagues, Greg Pensinger, who's our HPPA, so he's our Housing and Planning Policy Administrator, and then Ryan, who runs some of the units for us. So I want to be sure, team, did I miss anything in answering that question? They get a lot more nuanced into the work. We are looking at one last point I'll make. We are looking at our operating model. So as funds become tighter, we're looking at what every line expenditure is for our emergency interim housing supply to make sure that we're getting maximum efficiencies and helping people get to that next step, or at least becoming rental ready. Because some of these individuals, should they be allowed to get a Section 8 voucher, you see the difficulty sometimes for them using them because they then have to go into the private market and be rent ready, and they might not be able to. So with that, I'll pause. Greg, Ryan, anything to add in particular to that question?
Yeah, I'll just add that the county does publish a number of reports on their website around affordable housing development. Some include like the affordable housing bond that they use to develop out different sites. They have a number of links on there that I think we can share with the community at some point. So that's all I have to add.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that reminds me that how the city has a housing dashboard, so you can take a look at not only our asset, but the performance of the assets that are emergency interim housing If you look at the state's HCDC, Housing Community Development website, they have a list of what's called home key projects. Those are the adaptive reuse projects. You see that we rehab an old hotel motel, and then we use that for several years, and then we redevelop that. So there are numerous ways to get this information. David will be more than happy to send you some links that you can share. So if people are wanting to see where these dashboards are, what the national trends are, what the California trends are, what the Bay Area trends are, what Santa Clara is looking like, and then what the city of San Jose is looking like. So they have a better feel and understanding both upstream and downstream. How are people entering into homelessness? What are the categories and where are they exiting out to? We can definitely share that information. And before we move on, Greg, is there anything you wanted to add?
No, I think you got it covered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Keep it just a follow-up. You mentioned the cost per unit, 30 to 50,000 or so. Can you speak to what the costs are for the unhoused, just in terms of services? If they don't get, just calls for services, each individual is
Oh,
out.
yes.
What type of
Yes.
numbers are there?
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember. So if you think about all the ways that the unhoused interact with the system, from EMS to police to fire to different forms of private and public safety, you usually see that number about triple. So if you're seeing what efficiencies there are because the city interacts just simply getting people housed, you think about the street level services for the mental health challenges that they have. There is the National Alliance of Homelessness. They produce a report that shows when individuals are unhoused in the way that they interact within the city, you're capturing that cost somewhere. You're just capturing it in, unfortunately, police overtime or fire overtime, or you're having individuals within the community have to be sent out. You're having our BSJ teams. You're having all of these different entities that can only interact with you on the street level, but it doesn't get you sheltered. So you see I know it's a challenge because it feels like we're stretched for dollars. Everyone is stretched for dollars, right? You see them living in vehicles. I know we're going to get to that, but you end up having a savings that cuts that cost by more than half when we simply put them in shelter. Yes, we provide wraparound services. Yes, we provide interactions with the healthcare system to get them to and fro. It seems like a massive investment, but we're capturing that massive investment somewhere.
Thank you, Cupid.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Cupid, and Ryan, thank you for your answers. And Cupid, I know that Councilmember Pamela Campos and Councilmember George Casey would really appreciate any additional resources that you feel would benefit our residents in having. So feel free to send those over and we'll make sure that we get that information out.
Absolutely.
Moving on to the next question. So let's see, how many homeless individuals or families have entered the tiny home program and successfully exited into permanent housing?
Yeah, so I'm going to level set with the community because this is kind of nuanced. If you looked at our last report, we actually had good connection to outcomes. So it's like 30-40% of the individuals who enter into our tiny homes go into the next step. But we've recently had to lift the length of stay because that next step means permanent housing and that supply needs to be built. There's something called the regional housing needs allocation, and there's another thing called the housing element. These are two things you can Google right now. It tells you how underbuilt the city of San Jose and all Bay Area cities and all California cities are to meet their housing need. The reality of that is that unless there is more increased supply, we would just exit people back into the neighborhoods. Instead of doing that, we've stabilized them, tried to get them ready. And, one of the additional concerns we have, since we're all family here and we're level setting, is that as federal funds are decreased, that is a critical part of what the housing authority provides, what they provide to the county, so we get them that long-term housing. That long-term housing still is a 4 to 6 to 7 year building cycle. So unless we have it today, the interim housing is the best way to get individuals sheltered so they're not being captured within that system that we already have to respond to. So there is no good answer to this, if I'm being honest, but the best thing that we're doing is what I think our council members and our mayor are leading us through is these hard conversations so we can show you where the outcomes are. Myself, our director, our team, we're practitioners. So we'll say, yes, we'll show you where every dollar went. We'll show you what the methodology is. But eventually, if we do not have that next step, to get people into, it's going to be extremely difficult to show that throughput. One success for us is that we're stably sheltering individuals. We've seen people sheltered, we've getting them connected to jobs, but I know if I was a community member and I'm saying, well, what's happening in my community? I want to see people get to that next step. When we start seeing the cranes that show that development is happening, I think that that would trigger like, yes, this is happening. There's a lot of uncomfortable conversations going on, frankly, about financial resources, and our strong federal partnership is where a lot of those resources are released, especially to the state. And if that dries up, I don't know if you all have had the chance. Another thing to Google is the current president's skinny budget. He's looking at gutting those resources for people who are currently getting assistance from voucher programs and things like that. So that's going to be a challenge. Like I said before, we've seen 20, 30, 30 and 40% pass through in our programs prior. Well, the challenge that we're having now is as we stably house individuals, that next step is a challenge. And that's evidenced by the regional housing needs allocation that tells you today how many units not only would be needed in the city of San Jose. So, we've had 44% permanent housing placement. I've just gotten a text from the team, thank you all, that show that we have that great throughput. We're trying to get to a higher number. We would love to get to a higher number. I probably sleep better at night, but that challenge is going to be continued throughput to more of a permanent housing solution.
Thank you, Cupid. So now we're going to move to a policy and accountability question. What housing department accountability mechanisms or city auditor review is in place to ensure equitable district-wide distribution of shelter facilities before new ones are approved in districts 10 and 2?
Yeah, and this is where I kindly defer to the elected leaders on this call. I'll pass that question kindly to them. I think the challenge is that we as the housing department, me and my colleagues, me as the deputy director reporting to the director, we go where tasked to go happily. And when we are asked to do something, we do that. There is state audits that happen. So we just had a state audit last year. We just responded and closed it out this year. We're waiting for the auditor's response. We're going through an internal city audit about homelessness. So the housing department is going through several audits. But that policy question, I'm going to defer to the elected politicians.
Yeah, that hasn't been formulated. I know that, and I don't want to speak for Councilmember Campos, but the south side of San Jose has done, at least for the moment, its fair share. And there are a significant number of other districts that need to start pulling their own weight. So though I understand, I'm supportive of the development's impact and the need for them, I would not support any more here in South San Jose anytime soon until the other districts have chipped in and done their work as well.
Yeah, I'll just add to that I definitely want to make sure that with the current supply of EIH in South San Jose, District 2 and District 10 particularly, that we're able to keep our promise to our neighbors, our residents in South San Jose, that the benefit of accepting these types of solutions into our neighborhood is that we're going to see results. So my team and I are dedicated to working with our staff at the City of San Jose to ensure progress is made and kept in our South San Jose communities. I will just take this opportunity to ask a question that I haven't heard asked yet, related to equity. How many mothers with children have been identified in unsheltered homelessness?
That's going to be a challenging question, Councilmember. I'll probably have to get back to you. I know that we would have to take a look, and I would want to get you more recent data. So with our point in time count, I know that you're a champion for families, individuals who are going into or exiting out of foster care, and then working class mothers who might be, temporarily unsheltered. Let me get back to you because I want to be sure that we're hitting it on its head. I don't think that we've been asked this question in this way before. So I would love to follow up, make sure that I get that information. You'll hear it from either myself or Eric Sullivan, our director.
Thank you. I will just preface that with the knowledge that we have that there is an existing population of single women with children who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness along our creeks and elsewhere throughout the city, sleeping in cars. So I appreciate you know, the team and the city's response to working on addressing that very vulnerable population in our city's homelessness.
Absolutely, and we'll definitely follow up. I will share one stat that we do know, about around 50%, almost 60% of the individuals that are unhoused are single men or single women, but that does leave a significant population that are either elderly, disabled, couples, or families that have children. So we will get you that information.
Thank you, Cupid, and thank you, Councilmember Casey, for your answer, and Councilmember Campos for you as well, and for asking that additional question. We appreciate it. So now we're going to move on to compliance and enforcement. This final section includes questions directed towards DOT, parking enforcement around encampments, and RVs. We'll start with the first question. Because the city has been incapable enforcing existing ordinances on those living in public spaces, what is the city willing to change about its own behavior to convince us that anything will be different?
So just to be clear, is that directed at me and specific to lived in or parked vehicles?
I'm just reading the question for what it is, but I would assume yes, that is correct.
Along the lines of some of the other responses, we can work within the confines of the programs that we have. Relative speakingly to lived in vehicles specifically, DOT's primary program to address lived in vehicles is what we refer to as the OLIVE program, the Oversized and Lived in Vehicle Enforcement Program, which aimed to identify where the vehicles were across the city. We have a dashboard on our website that folks can readily find the data that we collected to identify where the vehicles were, to prioritize sites across the city where we would establish temporary no parking zones to facilitate relocation of the vehicles, or if they don't abide by that restriction, towing of the vehicles, and then afford the city the opportunity to clean those areas that in some cases hadn't been cleaned for a very long time. We keep those areas clear for approximately 30 days, and then we evaluate the effectiveness of the zone and the movement over the course of the next 90 days through 30, 60, and 90-day evaluations of what the conditions are at those sites. There's one OLIVE site that was worked within D10 along Chenoweth. And then there's kind of one placeholder site within, one in D2 on Chenoweth, one placeholder site in D10 that we're still, yet to be identified. A lot of moving vehicles throughout the city, and we'll be working with the council member to, zero in on that location through the end of this fiscal year. The OLIVE program will continue on through next year with more sites, and we're finalizing the inventory throughout the city to identify locations and do the analysis. That data will be updated on our OLIVE website as well, so the community can keep tabs on the progress.
Thank you for that answer.
So I guess, sorry to jump in again.
Sure.
I think part of the frustration is we have laws on the books, and we have folks that are parked, and not complying with those ordinances. Is this a resource issue? Is it, we can cite folks, and unless it's a tow-away zone, I guess all we can do is write a ticket potentially, and that's not necessarily going to modify anyone's behavior if they're in that situation. Financially, they may not be in a situation to get a place anyway, so a ticket's not going to really discourage them from being there. Are those some of the hurdles that we're confronting that's preventing us from I guess enforcing the laws that are on the books? I think that's the crux of the question, right? We do have laws on the books that prevent this type of behavior, or should theoretically. Why aren't we pulling the trigger, and why aren't folks adhering to those ordinances?
Yes. So I'll maybe touch on what folks commonly try to grasp onto, the notion of 72-hour parking violations being the silver bullet. we can tag and mark and investigate vehicles up, down, sideways, and we do it often. If you look at our vehicle concerns dashboard, which again is online, we investigated, I think, over nearly 17,000 vehicles across the city, not all of which are lived in, but that resulted in very, very few, less than 20 vehicles being towed. It's because the California Vehicle Code is very specific in what one needs to do in order to comply to skirt the enforcement mechanism. They have to move the vehicle, often a little ways, sometimes a little further, but in all reality, movement is movement, and we can't then enforce. So the nuances is the biggest challenge when it comes to the California Vehicle Code that was never contemplative of a lot of the homelessness issues that we face. And it isn't necessarily the right, sorry for the pun, vehicle to address the challenges of lived-in vehicles. We do work very closely, and the cases do, get routed in some ways to our housing department in the hopes of coordinating some response and outreach to connect them with services. But as they said, the resource, the availability of alternatives, I think is the challenge.
Thank you.
And if I could also take this opportunity to follow up on what Olympia raised earlier in describing the process for abatements of encampments. You said that there is a different process for removing RVs. Could you explain that process for us, please?
Yeah, I think that it is that the California Vehicle Code governs how we manage and enforce on-street parking. And so with that, the tool that we are using predominantly to address homelessness and lived-in vehicles is the OLIVE program. So through the identification of particularly challenged or high trafficked areas, through that inventory analysis is where we're concentrating our efforts with the limited resources that we have. It doesn't negate the ability of the public to report these vehicles through SJ 311, but in reality, the focus is on some outreach, and DOT's focus is on the OLIVE program and addressing kind of the non-lived in tens of thousands of vehicles that we also investigate.
Thank you. And I will just share from my personal experience. One of the challenges which Cupid brought up as it relates to getting people from emergency interim shelter onto that next step, I frequently found with RV dwellers that they are also lacking a place to go. So when the OLIVE program comes in and says, you can no longer be on this street, we are going to tow your vehicle if it is there. Great, they understand that, but where is that next place to go? And we saw Berryessa Safe Parking Site open and fill up very quickly. There are very few alternatives for safe parking sites within our city for folks to go. And so I guess my comment / question is this a limitation that is experienced by your team as it relates to the OLIVE program, being able to help people move from streets into a safer place that is safe for both housed residents and the RV dwellers?
Yeah, so far the vast majority of the time has been the establishment of the OLIVE zones with the towway, temporary towway signage going up, with the ultimate answer being, unfortunately, there is nowhere for us to direct you to go. You just can't be in this area. To highlight the successes is when Berryessa opened and the coordination that DOT and housing played together to where there was almost a direct correlation between some of our enforcement efforts and the path to the safe parking sites. So to the extent that is available in the future, I think we can work hand in hand to move these vehicles off our streets.
Thank you. And I'll just ask one more quick question, hopefully. When there are public safety concerns from our residents, because if there's an RV that is obstructing vision. I know, for example, along Vista Park, we have Carlton Senior Living Center, and it became a safety concern to have RVs along the road in case there was some kind of emergency. We needed to be able to have access for fire and safety to come out. So are there opportunities through public safety to address RVs that are on the street that are causing concerns to residents? What opportunities or limitations do we have there?
Yeah, so my job would be to enforce existing parking regulations that are out there. If there are concerns over sightlines, then the DOT neighborhood traffic management engineers would be able to maybe make some assessments and establish additional parking restrictions and or red curbing if there's sightline issues or something like that, extending red curb from driveways or from intersections and the like. So we could coordinate with your office and that team.
Thank you.
Oh, you're on mute, David.
Thanks. Thank you, Councilmember Campos, and thank you, Arian, for your answers. We have time for one final question, and that question is kind of touches on some of the things we've already discussed, but how are homeless encampments, specifically RVs, being enforced in zones near tiny homes? For example, there are lived-in vehicles at Santa Teresa and San Ignacio. It appears that 311 complaints haven't been submitted, or they have been submitted and the results are very slow.
Yeah, so I am a D10 resident, previously D2, very close to where this question is hitting home. So I drive by it frequently. SJ 311 reports of lived-in vehicles currently are routed to the housing department as the system was previously designed, with the goal of connecting them with resources and providing outreach. So that doesn't come to my team from an enforcement perspective when lived-in vehicles and RVs are reported. So the expectation of an enforcement arm coming out is maybe where there's some disconnect.
Just a comment here. Omar Passens texted me and said that he's aware of the city attorney bringing a number of ordinances to the council to help address conduct as it applies to RVs. So.
Yeah, I'll add that, yeah, this year's budget does direct staff, my team, very heavily involved in developing kind of additional recommendations to beef up the response to lived-in vehicles. So I would tell the community to work closely with their council members on staying, informed about how that process moves forward.
And just to give you a grasp of the scope of it, it's going to be like 6 or 7 ordinances that they're contemplating bringing online. So.
Thank you, Councilmember, and thank you, Arian, for your answers. So that concludes our community submitted questions, and I want to thank staff for their responses. But before we close, we'll hear some final remarks from city staff. So why don't we start with the housing department, then we'll move to Beautify SJ and then DOT.
Yeah, thank you. Community, we really appreciate your comments, your concerns. We'll continue responsive and transparent with the resources that we have. Success for us looks like taking the council direction, taking the mayor's direction, and utilizing every dollar that we have efficiently and effectively to target and make sure that we're connecting with individuals and having a high occupancy rate at our available EIHs, safe sleeping sites, and then the deals that we're doing with the state. So you'll continue to see a focus from our department on operations and execution, from outreach to site operations to solutions to get people to that next step in the building towards more affordable housing. If you need anything, I'm connected to many of the chiefs of staff here. Feel free to reach out to them. They'll reach out to me. Our team is available to answer some of the hard questions, some of the soft questions. We want to just be transparent in what we're doing so we can face these challenges as a community.
Olympia for Beautify SJ.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite. And I was happy to speak to our residents in D2 and D10. I would like the residents to know that Beautify SJ is out daily. We run a team Monday through Saturday, 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. during the summers and 5 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the fall and winter. We do an enormous amount of work around encampment management and blight response. And always tell folks you can reach us by phone, email, you can report blight on SJ311, or we also have an encampment reporting tool that you can use at this time. In the fall, you'll be able to report encampments on SJ311. We're starting that process now to migrate the reporting system there. I encourage folks to continue to report. We service 173 encampments every week. We do a multitude of different abatements. We work with 8 different jurisdictions. We have an RVP3 program that goes out to folks that are living in vehicles and collects, at this point, has collected over 400,000 pounds of bio waste to ensure that things don't end up on the street or sidewalk. We're servicing an enormous amount of vehicles. If there's trash, debris, graffiti, etc., please reach out to us and continue to report those issues. We look forward to working with our community. We've done a variety of different community things. I'd also like to announce that many of you, especially the neighborhood leaders, have probably already received an invite. On Saturday, June 7th from 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. we are having a neighborhood forum on homelessness. We have the Director of Housing, Eric Sullivan, Director of PRNS around encampment management, John Cicerelli. We will have the police chief as well as the director from DOT. Is being facilitated by the assistant city manager. But this is a time for residents and neighbors to come out to City Hall at the Rotunda and really ensure that your voice is heard. You could talk about your frustrations, tell us what's working well, tell us the areas that you want us to improve on. That's where we're hosting these forums. So I look forward to seeing many of you there.
Arian from DOT.
Wow, Olympia, I did not prepare a closing statement as eloquent as yours. You know, my team does a lot outside of the realm of homelessness, and so I won't go into all of those duties, but in the realm of homelessness, which is, you know, the center of our conversations here today, you know, the Olive program is our focus in that work, as well as responding to the SJ311 vehicle concerns reports, some of which admittedly are lived-in vehicles. So I often tell the community to continue to use that tool. It does get response. Sometimes not the outcome that folks are wanting or expecting, but we do work every case that comes through there that lands within my team. The community can continue to keep tabs of the Olive program and the programs that may come out of this year's budget on our websites, because we attempt to do a good job in providing a dashboard and update data so that folks can keep tabs on our progress.
Thank you, Arian. So to close out tonight, we'll hear final comments from Council Members Campos and Casey. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Councilmember Pamela Campos.
Thank you. I will not keep us much longer. Just thank you again to the residents who showed up, to our staff and different departments that are working diligently on this difficult issue for our city. So I appreciate the sense of community that we are all working to address this together. And a reminder that this webinar has been recorded. We will post it on our District 2 Council YouTube page, shared on our channels. If you would like to reach my office, the email is district2@sanjoseca.gov. You can also visit the city website to find more ways to contact our District 2 Council office. Thank you.
Councilmember Casey.
Yeah, not much more to add. I just want to thank the city staff to come out. You know, this is later on in the evening here, so we do appreciate you making the time for us. And for all you folks that are online and asked your questions and submitted them, this is a collaborative effort. This is a difficult issue. There's no silver bullet solution, so all we can do is work as hard as we can at it, and I appreciate everyone's efforts here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Casey. So thank you again to everyone who joined us. These conversations are never easy, but they are necessary. Public service demands public accountability, and tonight we've taken an honest step in that direction. Please continue reporting through the San Jose 311 app, engaging with your council members, and advocating for solutions rooted in dignity, public safety. Good night.